And welcome. We're talking to some of our past CEOs for our 35th anniversary for TUANZ. And so welcome to Ernie Newman this morning. Welcome.
G'day, Craig.
Now, Ernie, you were the CEO from 1999 to 2010. That's a decent chunk of time.
Yeah, it was a pretty long time. It was the longest I've ever stayed in any job, actually. And I've typically had a concentration span of about 4 or 5 years, but there was just so much going on and so much change throughout that time. And every 6 to 10 months, there was a new project came on. So it was a pretty fascinating stint.
Yeah, no, look, you took over the CEO role at the end of the 90s. So what sort of led you to make the shift into that telco space?
A fluke. I was working for Carter Holt Harvey in a pretty mundane sort of job as a marketing manager, and I'd kind of done my dash with that. And a lot of my career had been in running business associations as part of the wider network of what is now Business New Zealand and various other independent ones. And I quite enjoyed that sort of work. And I saw the job advertised with TUANZ and thought, oh yeah, that sounds like me. I didn't have a clue about anything to do with telecommunications policy or anything of the kind. So I applied for it. It was a pretty drawn out process and eventually got it. There I was.
There you were. All right. Before I get into exactly what happened over the 90s, let's just take a helicopter view and sort of say, well, what were the technology changes that really stood out over that period of time that you were there?
Well, at the time that I came in 99, mobile phones were really very much in their infancy. At that point, we had Telecom and Bell South. And the situation that Bell South was in really sort of showed the sickness of the industry. You know, there was no interconnection. There was certainly nothing like number portability. And basically, if you subscribe to Bell South, you could only talk with other Bell South subscribers, of whom there were probably only a handful.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very immature situation. The internet was kind of there. Broadband was a term that most people didn't understand. Bandwidth, broadband, that sort of thing was still in the future. So it's quite remarkable to think back that that's only 23 years ago, and such a vast amount has happened in that time.
Yeah. You led TUANZ through some pretty halcyon days for the organisation itself, but what were some of the key changes that you were most proud of advocating for during that period?
Probably, well, there was a whole string of them. There was number portability. There was compulsory access regime to telecom for people like their communications. There was local loop unbundling. There was bitstream access. There was compulsory co-location of cell towers. There was the formation of the Telecommunications Forum. You just go on and on, mobile termination. But when you say the one that really stands out, it was the operational separation of telecom back in 2006.
Yeah.
Because that was an absolute marathon, and I was actually just looking through some of the old issues of the TUANZ Topics magazine. This to me kind of was the TUANZ Topics cover that made it all stand out, and that was all about Theresa Gannon coming along a few days after that operational separation to a TUANZ Telecommunications Day. And you probably can't read the cover, but the quotes from her on the cover: "This is the start of our new way of life. We're committed to this new direction. We will play by the rules. We will be true to our word." And that, to me, was the day that it all came home that, telecommunications in New Zealand had changed dramatically, and TUANZ had been, right in the thick of all that.
Yeah. Let's just go back to that a little bit, because you're big advocates for local loop unbundling. Why was that particular topic so important, or that particular service?
Loop unbundling was really the key to competition, because while the local loop was completely controlled by the incumbent, there was no way in the world that a new entrant could offer residential services. And that's why clear communications for its first number of years was really compartmentalised as just an alternative operator for telcos. The situation, I suppose, was brought to a head by the 0867 issue. And I don't know whether you recall that one, Craig, but Telecom, I think the first time, really overstepped the mark and found a way to basically take clear out of that market overnight by imposing a surcharge on anyone who had the temerity to want to use a service other than telecom for toll calls. And that, I think, was the point at which the government said enough is enough. So, all of those issues, they all kind of gelled together to move New Zealand from, clearly the basket case of the OECD for telecommunications right through to one of the front runners.
Yeah, okay. I do want to come back to the mobile thing because the Commerce Commission has just refreshed the local and mobile number portability rules, and you were key to getting number portability implemented in New Zealand. I mean, why was it so hard to get that sort of thing over the line when it just seems logical?
Well, telecom in the early days, because number portability was the first big policy issue when I took over in 1999. And Roderick Dean at that stage was CEO of Telecom. He was absolutely adamant that Telecom owned the numbering system for New Zealand. Anyone else who had the cheek to actually want to be part of that was going to have to pay dearly. But without portability, you simply cannot have competition. People are not going to change their, particularly business users, are not going to change their telecommunications supplier if they have to get a new telephone number. So it was really the foundation of all the other changes that took place subsequent to that. And, I think Roderick Dean to this day still resents the fact that Telecom were required to share that with the rest of the industry.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you talk to many people these days, they don't understand that, when we were first using mobile phones, you had to think about which network was your you were calling on and texting to, because it cost you money as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. And interestingly, Craig, I've heard a few people lately talk about competition among the banks. And, we're all very reluctant to change our bank, no matter how much they may brass us off. And one of the reasons we are reluctant to change the bank is that we have so many transactions that are automatic payment, direct debit, and all that sort of stuff. Now, if we had number portability in the banking industry, as we do in telecommunications, one of those massive barriers to change in banks might be removed. And so it'd be interesting it's an interesting analogy because we still have in banking that deterrent to churn that we had in those days in telecommunications.
The last topic I want to ask you about is fibre. So fibre to the home was a big platform for the national government when they came in 2008. And it's probably a little known story that you were quite active behind the scenes working on that. So why, that was a pretty big shift in New Zealand as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I, one of the great memories is being invited out of the blue by the Wellington Chamber of Commerce to come to a lunch that they were having where the speaker was John Key, who at that point was leader of the opposition, relatively new politician at that point. And so I was invited along, so I went to this lunch and somewhat to my surprise found I'd been seated at the head table, and even more to my surprise found that I'd been seated next to John. And turned out that was the occasion when he announced that the National Party policy would include the ultra-fast broadband. And I remember shortly after that, Labor came out with a similar sort of policy, but very diluted with only about a third of the amount of money. And we'd been working pretty closely with Labor, with David Cunliffe, who was the minister at the time. And he gave me a right royal bollocking because I described the Labor announcement as underwhelming. And I was summoned to David's office along with Graham Osborne, who was the chairman at the time, that same evening to get our ear chewed. But at the end of the conversation, David, I think, had to concede that what we'd said was right, that National had stolen the high ground on this thing, and he had not got enough money in the pot. So he promptly found a whole lot more money. But anyway, National came in and the UFB took off. And the thing that always gives me a laugh is that we're so far ahead of the Australians in this thing, because they started down that track a year before we did. I remember being at an ATUG meeting, the Australian Telecommunications Users Group meeting, where the then Minister Malcolm Turnbull was talking about this thing and how good it was going to be. And they kicked off a year ahead of us, and now we are probably a good 5 years ahead of them by whatever measure you like to use.
Yeah, we are. And imagine, the value of those upgraded networks in New Zealand has been shown over the last couple of years as, life has changed because of a pandemic that's driven, huge data uptake across the network rather than being in offices. So thank you for that. Just last question, just thinking about TUANZ itself rather than some of the advocacy stuff, what were some of your highlights about running the organisation during that time?
Oh yeah, the events, absolutely the events, and the magazine to a degree, although the magazine ironically fell by the wayside because of the technology that we had helped to foster. But the events were brilliant. We had a massive events operation. When I come to think of it, we were running at one stage on average 2 events a week. And some of them were big. The education conference, the call centre conferences, and we were taking quite a financial risk on a lot of these. One of the memories I have is going to an INTUG meeting where we were talking about how the various associations operated from a commercial basis. And the British guy solemnly saying that they had a view that they always needed to have a year's turnover in the bank. And I did a quick calculation on the back of an envelope, and we had about 6 weeks. And we always existed on about 6 weeks turnover. We were good at making money, but we were good at spending it. When I came in, we were it was touch and go whether we would actually be able to recreate the organisation from where we were. And to be honest, it wasn't a hell of a lot better when I left. You tend to leave when things are on a bit of a downturn and you're running out of steam. But those events were brilliant. And one of the ones I'm really proud of was the education conference, where we used to do a road show with a key international speaker every year, going around the country and firing up the teachers who were at the forefront of using internet and IT and other technology in the classroom. And I think we put New Zealand schools a step ahead of where they would otherwise have been. And I think the benefit of that is being seen in current generations.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, look, thanks, Ernie, for your time. It's been a pleasure once again to talk to you. And as we head towards past 35 years, it's it's built on the legend that is Ernie Newman.
I'll talk to you again in another 35 years, Craig.
All right, thanks very much.